Thank you for coming to this workshop. It's a pleasure to rehearse history. But of course, the purpose of my being here today, I'm sure, and the purpose of this session is to talk about how that history connects with everything we're living, the experience we're living today. And I hope I'm going to be able to do that because, as with my currently missing namesake, we've both been active on LGBT rights issues for 40 years or more. I focused particularly on the labour movement, and the period I'm going to be talking about today, exceptionally, specifically, is the 1980s, which was, in my view, the turning point, the decade during which we established LGBT rights, human rights, equal rights, as a firm part of the agenda of the labour movement. And I should say at the beginning, when I talk about the labour movement, I mean the labour movement as a whole. I'm going to be talking both about the trade unions and the Labour Party in terms of that work. In the 1980s, I was, as you heard from the introduction, I was one of the officers of what was then the Labour Campaign for Gay Rights, the L that added in the early 80s. But by the time we got to the crucial year of 1985, which I'm going to use as a linchpin for this discussion, then it was the Labour Campaign for Lesbian and Gay Rights. It's now called, it went through various other transformations. It's now LGBT Labour. But it's still there, and I'm still a member of it, although I got purged because I was too left-wing. That was 10 years ago. But the other key element, because this is an integrated discussion, was the trade unions, and it was a result of work inside individual unions, much of it in the 1980s, that led the TUC to create its own LGBT national structures in 1998. That came directly from pressure from member unions of the TUC, and I was privileged to be appointed as the TUC's first LGBT policy officer in 1998, a post from which I retired a few weeks ago. And there is now a successor left with carrying that burden. But the two struggles continued together, and the victories we've recorded for equal rights for LGBT people are a result, in my view, overwhelmingly, of three combined strands. One is the struggle within the community and of activists like the other Peter, who will tell you about that when he gets to talk about it himself. But the other is the political and economic struggles that we raised across the labour movement. And they were always integrated, and it was always a struggle to persuade people that they were integrated, and it was always a struggle, especially in the 80s, to persuade people that it was worth continuing down that road. I think the achievements we've had over the last few years tell us that it was definitely worth going down that road. And when I get to the end, if I've got a few seconds left, I'm going to wrap up by saying it's not over. We may have achieved legal equality. We have achieved all but total legal equality, with the exception of pension rights, but we haven't yet achieved our liberation from prejudice and homophobia. So that's enough by way of framework. 1985 was a key year, in my view. It's the year in which the TUC Congress, in September of that year, carried the first motion committing the trade union movement to support for what was then just lesbian and gay rights, and the motion that went to the TUC was a fairly modest one, and it talked about rights at work, as you'd expect a trade union congress to debate. It was moved by NAPO, the probation officers, and it was supported by NALGO, which of course is now part of Unison, and Unison has been, from the very beginning, the constituent parts of it has been a key element in progressing the equality issues through the labour movement. 1985 was also the year that we had the first ever debate at Labour Party conference on LGBT issues. Again, just lesbian and gay in those days. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because the history of that struggle is something that was very dear to my heart. I was centrally involved with it. And it was the foundation for what followed. Not the end, but the beginning of the work, but a crucial start for that. So if you take yourself back to the 1980s, and you've got highlights from that period of some very negative incidents, of which the Bermondsey by-election, in which of course Peter was the Labour candidate, was the nadir, if you like, the bottom point of overt homophobia across the spectrum. And the rest of the picture was not always as bad as that. It was partly the media coverage and so on was partly in response to actually the good things that were then happening. And the good things that were happening in the 80s, bearing in mind, of course, we had no legal rights at all. You could be sacked for being gay, and you had no way back to challenge it. If you were in a same-sex relationship, you had no right to have your children. You could be barred, you were barred from service in the police or the armed forces or lots of other, I could go on, but we had no rights, basically. And of course, same-sex, you had an unequal age of consent, which was the headline issue for gay men at that time, although not obviously for lesbians, which caused its own tensions. But we'll come back to that in a second. So that was the position of having no rights, but we did have allies. We've been going since the 70s as a movement, as a liberation movement, since the Stonewall riots, the Gay Liberation Front founded in this country in 1972, the first Pride March in 1972, going every year since then, and we had one crucial allies. We had allies in Labour local authorities, but this was a time of the Bennite left. This was a time when a new left-wing movement had emerged out of the debris of the Wilson and Callaghan governments of the 1970s, which lost power to Thatcher in 1979. This new left wasn't just a new economic left as previous lefts had been. This was a left that understood that socialism was also, hello Peter, lovely to see you. This was a left that also understood that socialism included social as well as economic issues. This was a left that understood that women's rights, that racism were key issues for a progressive labour movement. And for the first time, because of the work that we've been doing as lesbian and gay socialists, inside society, inside the community, and inside the political parties, that we were part of that agenda as well. So we had the GLC, we had people who are still around. I wonder where they are now. John McDonnell set up and supported the London Lesbian and Gay Centre. Ken Livingstone was a prominent speaker on platforms across the Labour movement, advocating that Labour needed to take up the issue of lesbian and gay people. So that's where we were. The bad news was the right wing. Peter's going to tell you about Bermondsey, so I won't go over that again. You had massive public hysteria for anything to do with lesbian and gay rights. The tabloid media was still is an absolute disgrace, but in those days it was targeting us. It wasn't targeting refugees, it was targeting us. Boy, was it bad. I haven't got time to go into that, but we also, because that was topped off with the AIDS crisis had just recently arrived, and gay plague was the message. So if you were gay, you were not just evil, corrupt, destroying the youth of today, perverted. You were also a plague that was going to destroy society. So that was the life we lived in the 1980s. We in the Labour campaign for gay rights, as it then was, chose to go down the road of trying to persuade the Labour Party that it needed to put us on the agenda and that it needed to prepare for government, because we never thought Thatcher was going to win 3 general elections in a row. It was a disastrous prospect. And then John Major after that in 1992. Labour government's for next election, Labour government's for next election, Labour government's for next election. All we have to do is win Labour to a policy of legislating equality for our community. And that was our objective, and I was part of the decision-making process, decided we will come out of the shadows. We won't just talk politely to shadow ministers in the back halls of Westminster. We will go up front and we will try and win a battle on the floor of party conference, because in those days, long dear days gone by, not only was party conference much bigger, it was also a genuine debating opportunity. And it was televised live in those days. In 1982, we had a fringe meeting at conference, Blackpool it was that year, which was quite normal. We've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, and nobody paid any attention, and about 20 people turned up. But this year the News of the World picked up on it, spotted it on the conference programme and went to town on it. And as a result, 200 people turned up at that fringe meeting. Tony then cancelled another meeting in order to come and speak. Ken Livingston spoke at it, Peter spoke at it, and that put us firmly among activists on the agenda. It took till 1985 before we got onto the agenda of the conference. As you know the system, we had to get 10 constituencies to put forward a motion. We did. We failed in 1984. We did it in 1985. I was one of the delegates. I was one of the constituencies that achieved that success. We had the whole week because the NSE wanted us to remit the motion so that it wasn't televised live and it wasn't debated in public. We refused, and have a bit more. We got to the final day of conference. They wanted it the last day so nobody would be watching. We called for a card vote, live television. Sarah Roloff's my colleague and friend, is now a Unison activist in the Midlands. She moved the motion very effectively. That's where Sodom and Gomorrah and the New Jerusalem, my book, comes from. The title, she used that in her speech. It's what her Labour MP had said. We're not really interested in this kind of things. We want the New Jerusalem, not Sodom and Gomorrah. We tied those two things together. Sarah tied them together in the speech. We won the vote on the card vote with 58.5% of the vote. Now, many of us knew it wasn't enough to win one vote at a Labour Party conference to win policy. Some people thought we'd done it now. Not all of us. We thought we had to keep doing. We went back the following year, 86, at that conference. We had a smooth organising machine in place by then, and we won 69% of the vote. That got us into the 87, the election manifesto. There were a lot. I haven't got time to go through it. It's in the book. A lot of hurdles after that. We had to go to conference 5 times before the party said, oh gosh, we've got a policy on this, and we're going to do something about it. And it took us till, of course, the 97 government and the Blair government to begin the process of legal reform. I haven't got time to go into that. We can talk about it in the session. But we won it because we had significant support amongst lay delegates, non-LGBT delegates, because of the work we had been doing in the constituencies, in the branches, and at conference. Every single day we were lobbying, every single morning, every single lunchtime, every single evening, every single fringe meeting we went round. Boy, did we use a lot of leaflets. God, was it knackering. I couldn't possibly do it now at my age. So 3 hours sleep a night job. But we also won it because we won the trade union vote, because this was a card vote. And I haven't got time again to go into this, but the unions had been on side for some years. The big unions had been on side, not all of them. And the key message within the unions was the solidarity message: an injury to one is an injury to all, basically trade union principle. And of course, something to close on, this was the year of the miners' strike. Has everybody here seen Pride? Seen the film? Sure, everybody has. If you haven't, you can still get. I think it still shows up on television. You can get it on DVD. I was honoured to be invited to give them the words that appear right at the end of the film, illustrating the historic significance of LGSM, Lesbians, Gay Support Miners, and the miners' strike. That solidarity, you can't measure what impact it had in terms of people's votes and how it went. We found it, the doors were open to us when we went to unions and said, support this motion. And enough of them did for us to get that vote, and that was something that continued up to the present day. So we finally got there. We finally got policy. After 5 consecutive attempts, we had Section 28, we had all those other horrors that we had to keep pulling the leaders back because they forgot they had a policy. And then we got to where we are today. And where we are today, of course, is that we have mainly equal rights, but we do not have liberation. We still confront prejudice, homophobia all over the world, but even in this country as well. And the fight needs to continue, and I'm delighted to say when I was working for TUC, that was understood and recognised. And I know that my successors will continue in that fight. There are many activists in the trade union movement who are now committed and understand this agenda and will continue that fight. We have to defend their rights as trade unionists as well, because who knows, this government doesn't like us very much as trade unionists. Even if it does like LGBT people, providing they're not too radical and they're willing to serve in the cabinet. So I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you very much.